All right, so today we begin our ecology unit. So today what I'd like to just do is introduce to you guys at least to the concept of ecology and how it's a much more broader concept than you may think. Basically it's a study of the interactions not only between organisms like we've seen before kind of in evolution and otherwise, but also how they interact with their environment, and also how the environment interacts with them. It's kind of a complex concept to some degree. The thing I want you to really appreciate with this, or from all of this, is that all species are somehow connected, and whatever one does, it affects another. Sometimes very much so, sometimes very indirectly, but all species are connected in some way, shape, or form. So this is a picture from your book. It kind of highlights how things are connected to some degree. So let's kind of go over this real quick. So in this picture, you have an individual. In that case, that is an individual elk. All right. And that elk belongs to, as we've seen before, a population, which is members of the same species, a population of elks. And that population belongs to a much more broader concept called a community, which is basically other populations coexisting. You got the moose, you got the coyote, you got the owl, beaver, the rabbit, and then don't forget of course, all the trees and the plants and everything thereof. They belong together to this much even more broad concept called an ecosystem, which is basically all the living things and non-living things coexisting. And then they belong to what's called a biome, which is what this is here. We'll talk about that. And then last but not least, all of which belong to what's called the biosphere. All right. So the biosphere is anywhere in the world in which life is found. It's actually, believe it or not, a pretty thin layer. It only goes so high up into the atmosphere and so deep into the ground, but it's this very fragile but very powerful layer, if I may say, of the Earth. Now, the biosphere itself, we're thinking about this backwards again, is made of biomes. So biomes are things you perhaps talked about when you were younger, like the forests and the rainforests, the grasslands, deserts, all right, deciduous forests, coniferous forests, those kind of things. All right, so in this case, like the tundra region is a biome that extends pretty much all the way from parts of Alaska all the way to the eastern shores of Canada. All right, now below that the biome is different. It's a different biome. Above that the biome is more Arctic, almost permanently frozen. But the tundra region extends from thousands and thousands of miles. An ecosystem is just part of a biome. So for instance, could be a valley within that biome. All right, that's one way of looking at it. Ecosystem doesn't have to have strict borders. An ecosystem could be an entire mountain range. It could be a mountain. It could be under a rock on a mountain. Anywhere there's life found, you can, hypothetically create or consider what's called an ecosystem, which is taking into account all living and non-living things in that area. Now, as we mentioned before, within ecosystems there are communities, which are the different populations coexisting. So again, I mentioned the moose and the coyote, the rabbits. And then, as we talked about before, communities are made of populations, which are members of the same species. So the elk are part of this community. And then, of course, within a population are individual elks in this case. All right, so an individual belongs to a population, which belongs to a community, which belongs to an ecosystem, which belongs to a biome, which belongs to the biosphere, is kind of the big connection we're making today. All right, so in this case, an elk belongs to a population of elks, which belongs to a community of many different animals and plants and such, which belongs to an ecosystem in this case, which would be a valley, which belongs to a forest, I guess is what I'm calling this, a forest biome, and then obviously the biosphere is the biosphere. So I want you to start kind of digesting any ecosystem, if I may call it that, by looking at what are called biotic and abiotic factors. Okay, so biotic are living factors, things that are living or recently living. So for instance, this flying squirrel would be a biotic factor. An abiotic factor would be like the clouds. Clouds aren't living, never were, but they definitely play a role. So my question to you is, if you're looking at this picture here, how many biotic and abiotic factors can you spot in this ecosystem? And I hope that you can come up with a pretty significant list of both.